You guys have been in here like 10 times today. Yeah? Butchie, where you going? What you doing? Come here. Come here. All right. You good boys. Sit. Sit. Huddle up. Huddle up. Huddle up. Huddle up. That's my huddle. That's my huddle. My good boys. My good boys. Yeah. There's some good puppies. Hey folks, back in the shop again today, working on the Cub Cadet, playing with Brutus here. Working on my Cub Cadet articulating tractor. I had kind of a epiphany the other night. After one of my videos posted, I got some comments back from a couple of watchers, probably subscribers. I don't know for sure, but two gentlemen commented about the way I was setting up my pivot point between the two axles, and noted that the pivot point should be equidistant to the two axles, and I didn't have it set that way. And of course, you think about it, and that's important, as they explain, and that makes perfect sense. If you don't have the pivot point roughly equidistant between the two axles, then the two axles will follow different radii and a different radius in a turn, and they'll try to go different ways. I mean, they're not going to track. I spent the morning making some adjustments, shortening up the front frame and rearranging the rear frame a little bit. So it was good that they caught that, because I hadn't thought about that, not being very familiar with heavy equipment and articulated equipment, so obviously didn't think that through. So I appreciate the comments from you guys. I don't know everything for sure, and I often get good advice from the comments, so I appreciate that. Anyway, I've spent this morning, I'll show you what I've done, and then we've got some adjustments made. The drive line's going to be shorter. The front half of the drive line is going to be much shorter. I basically shortened the frame there by a foot. So I'll show you what I've done. I've shortened up this frame by a foot, basically. So the pivot point is a foot closer to the front axle. And I've increased the length of the rear axle, the rear frame, by 6 inches. Basically turn these frames around. So this is now 6 inches behind here. I still need to extend the frame out about 4 inches or so, and then there's about 4 inches for the hub and then the pivot point. So I will make some additional frame extensions for the rear frame. That'll put me roughly 23.5 inches from the pivot point to the front axle, and the same distance to the rear axle. So that's a significant change in terms of this thing working right. So I do really appreciate the advice in the comments. I do need to double up the plates here, so I'm going to be cutting some steel out. Basically, this plate is going to get sandwiched between two of these plates. So just for extra strength, so I'm going to cut duplicate plates out and some spacers. We'll do that. And right now I've got to work on a new hub here. So I've abandoned the foot-long, 18-inch long drive shaft that I previously had, and I'm going to use a flex disc coupler here directly to the end of the CV joint shaft. So that's a change there. That simplifies the drive line a little bit. I'm going to go make a coupling now. that's my centering pin. Lets me center the hub on there, the sleeve on there. It's got a little pin on the bottom. All right, I'm going to weld this. This shaft material was so hard that I had to switch to a carbide. This is actually a carbide end mill. I put it in the chuck, but that's just because I'm lazy. Alright, I'm going to cut a 3/16 keyway in this shaft. I've got a carbide end mill. Got to go 95 thousandths. Taking it real slow, I don't want to break this end mill. Okay, I think that looks good. That's perfect. Okay. All right, it's time to start welding this up a little better. All right, so these two pivot plates, I'm going to make bushings for these plates. Got some 4140 stock. We'll go to the lathe, we'll turn a couple of bushings just a 1/4 inch thick, and we'll weld them and then grind them smooth inside that opening. That'll make, if there's wear, it'll be on the bushing, and that's something that can be removed and replaced as, you know, a maintenance item, as opposed to wearing this plate itself, in which case the whole plate. And I mean, this is going to be assembled, you know, the plate between them, so it'll be an assembly, and we don't want to wear that out. I got the Ford F-250 hub yesterday. Came, there's a little dust cap in here. There's some needle bearings in here, but I'm not going to need those. And the way this looks like this hub is assembled is there's this, it's a big nut, and then it's staked with a cap screw here. So this nut looks like it holds the knuckle connection to the wheel hub together. And I don't need this. This is anti-brake, anti-lock brake, or speed, even speedometer cable connection. We're not going to use that. I do want to have a bearing to support this shaft. So, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. I am dealing with this limited length, which I'd like to stick with if I can. I'd rather not extend this and put a bearing further out. So, clearly with this being mounted basically right there, I do have room for the universal joint to go on here to continue the shaft into the rear transmission. What I'm going to try to do is mount a bearing in here. I have a disc of, mild steel. So I'm thinking about turning this down to fit all the way down to the bottom of this opening and bore this out for a bearing, press the bearing in, drop this in to the bottom, and maybe put a couple of pins in it to hold it. Something like that. So I think that's what I'm going to work on next, is go ahead and get this bearing mounted inside here to support the shaft. So we'll go back to the lathe with this, turn it to fit, and then we'll bore it for a bearing, press the bearing in. All right, folks, that's it for this week. We'll come back next week machining the hub and assembling the pivot assembly that the hub will attach to. And so those are the next two things. Largely we've got the front frame done, with the exception of welding the second shear plates on. I'm waiting to get the hub assembly, the pivoting assembly finished. We'll weld that up, then we'll weld this, and those will be finished. I've got the 1-inch rod in the assembly now, just for alignment purposes. Of course, that's not permanent. There'll be two small pins, one at the top and one at the bottom, that will provide the alignment once it's assembled, because you need to have the CV joint in the middle. So we'll come back next week working on that stuff. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the 3 gentlemen that commented the other night, 3 weeks ago by the time you see this, about centering the pivot between the 2 axles. So that was good advice. I don't know what I would have done without that. So I do really appreciate that. A lot of you guys have more experience in some of this stuff than I do, so I'm wide open to suggestions. A lot of great ideas come out of the comment section on these videos. So thank you very much for doing that. And thank you very much for watching. So we'll see you next week. We got more to do.